I appreciate it. I have to clear everything with the boss, so I do what my wife tells me. That's basically who runs the show in my house.
Very similar sound here in the studio with my producer, Pete. All right. Well, we're a couple of weeks away from the NFL, but we need our NFL fix here. I want to get into a couple different things. One is the Brady stuff. We didn't really talk a lot about it. It was kind of tucked in there, but what are we hearing now on the Brady stuff? I know there's not a decision expected until like mid-July, but is there any thoughts on which way this is going? Because originally it sounded like, John, they were very impressed with Brady. He was an A+. Then you're hearing not impressed by Brady. I know it's kind of hard to make sense of this all, but do you get any feeling that they're going to change their ruling?
Well, I think it depends on what way the NFL wants to go. They've had difficulty in the past calendar year when things have gone to court, and that's because of the changes that were unilaterally implemented from the collective bargaining agreement. So normally for years and years and years, at the end of the day, the NFL would win in court. Now they're starting to lose. If you look at the Adrian Peterson situation, if you look at the arbitrator overturning the Ray Rice punishment, it's been a tough run of luck. And I think people understand if the NFL doesn't come down at least from 4 games to, say, 2 or 1 game, there's no question the Players Association is going to take this to federal court. And to me, that means a stay at the minimum, and that means Tom Brady will be there week 1. So I think it all depends on what is happening behind the scenes. The NFL's trying to broker a deal, trying to get Tom Brady and the Patriots to accept a lesser penalty. That's a possibility. If it goes to court, I think you're going to see him in week 1. That doesn't mean he ultimately is going to win the case. It just means the punishment is going to push off at least for a little bit.
John, I want to get your thoughts on Russell Wilson. Are you looking at this from outside looking in as an ugly situation bound to happen? Do you think cooler heads will prevail? Because, obviously Wilson is in a spot of power, it seems like here, and anybody would love to have a guy like that on their team. But can the Seahawks, will they end up buckling here? How do you see this Wilson thing going?
Yeah, they'll buckle. I think it's much ado about nothing right now. The Seahawks understand, and this is just posturing back and forth. The bottom line is when you have a successful quarterback, and no one, understand this, Mike, nobody has won more in the NFL through their first 3 seasons than Russell Wilson. In the history of this game, no quarterback has won more games through 3 seasons. So that's how successful he's been. You can argue whether he should be the highest paid player in the NFL. We all know he shouldn't, but that's timing in any sport. If a big-time quarterback is up for a contract, you're going to get that big number, and it's going to be the highest paid player in the sport until Andrew Luck comes up and it's his turn. That's just the nature of it. The Seahawks understand that, and at the end of the day, if they have to, if worse comes to worse, they'll franchise him. They'll keep him there. They have to. This is not – people forget, this is not a tradition steeped in a franchise steeped in a winning tradition. This is the first time they've won a Super Bowl. They were a yard away from a second straight Super Bowl. They have to acquiesce, and they kind of understand that to have a franchise quarterback, and he's going to have to be paid like one.
Yeah, you wonder because what's he asking for, like $25 million annually, what that would do to that organization, what would that do to that franchise, though? I mean, they've kind of been a model franchise because they don't have to pay their quarterback, and that's something that the Eagles were kind of dealing with, too, because of Nick Foles, that they didn't have to worry about paying the main guy. When you pay that guy $25 million or what these quarterbacks get, could that potentially be the end of the Seahawks run?
Yeah, that's we've talked about in the past, and that's what's so strange about, to me, the Nick Foles Sam Bradford trade. It's not necessarily the players themselves; it's the difference in salary. Because one of the reasons Seattle was the most talented team in football over the last 3 years is the fact that they hit on a quarterback in the 3rd round, and they had to pay him $700,000 to $800,000. And that means you can allocate assets to other parts of your roster. And all of a sudden, that 53-man roster is much deeper, and that's what you saw in Seattle. And that, everybody knows that comes to an end at a certain point. And whether you're the Denver Broncos and you're dealing with paying Peyton Manning or the New England Patriots and Tom Brady or the Saints and Drew Brees, you have to go about it a different way. And that's what John Snyder has to do in Seattle. He's certainly going to be hit on the back end of his roster. There's no question about that. But that's what he's paid to do, and it's just part of the game and part of the structure of the NFL.
John McMullen's with us talking NFL Sports Network. Action on his TV show says the Eagles tried to blow me up with a smear campaign. Whether he's valid or not, how much more can Chip Kelly and this regime take from people just taking shots at him from all over the league? Or do people look at guys like Deshaun Jackson and LaShawn McCoy kind of as with a grain of salt?
Well, I think it's a grain of salt. I mean, I think Deshaun Jackson's telling the truth. I think the Eagles did implement a smear campaign, to be perfectly honest. But at the same time, it was easy to do because Deshaun Jackson acts like an idiot at times and surrounds himself with some bad people. And he's the one who's been flashing the gang signs on Instagram. You just have to point people in that direction to look at. So it's not like the information wasn't out there, but it was clear the Eagles, from their perspective, were trying to sort of create a plausible deniability because they walked away from a Pro Bowl player coming off his best season, remember, and they got nothing in return. So they were sort of trying to spin this story as to why they had to get away from him. A lot of ways it's unfair because, Deshaun Jackson grew up around a group of people that have done some bad things. But if you look at the NFL as a whole, he's never been in trouble off the field. And there's a lot of guys with a better reputation that can't say that same thing. So I kind of see both sides of the fence. I do think it was a smear campaign from the Eagles. I do think Deshaun Jackson doesn't handle his business in a mature fashion at times. This is just another example of that. So both sides are culpable in that divorce, and that's usually the tail in any divorce. So that's where it stands, and both sides deserve part of the blame.
John, when might we see football in Los Angeles?
I think very soon. I think not this upcoming season, obviously, but I think as early as 2016, at the latest 2017. I don't think there's any question. There's three teams with the history in Los Angeles. They're all wrangling to get there. San Diego is really no longer negotiating. The Chargers are no longer negotiating with the city. Same thing with the Raiders in Oakland. It's pretty clear the Rams want to move back. So right now, I think you're going to see two of those three teams end up in Los Angeles. And the biggest hurdle is the stadium situation because obviously the league wants no part of the Rose Bowl or anything like that. And even in the short term, because if you get a stadium set and to be built, you're going to have a temporary facility. And some people have even thrown out the LA Galaxy Stadium in Carson, which is, can only seat about 30,000 fans. So it would be strange to see an NFL game in front of that few people. But you see in Minnesota now, they're playing in TCF Bank Stadium, which only seats about 45,000 as they get their new stadium ready. So it's been done in the past. It'll probably be done in this situation. I don't see why the NFL can't use the Rose Bowl for a year or something like that. And I think that'll be the ultimate end game. But, yeah, there's going to be football back in Los Angeles relatively soon.
Who are the candidates to go there?
It's those three teams with a history in the city. It's
so what's
the
that?
Rams,
St. Louis, L.A., and
the Chargers,
and the Chargers.
The Chargers and the Raiders. So I think two of those three teams are likely to be there. And in that situation, the most likely scenario to share a stadium, because they've already talked about it, are the Raiders and the Chargers. They've talked about sharing a facility in Carson, but the Rams have the bigger history, probably the biggest history of all in Los Angeles. They're not happy in St. Louis. But I think the NFL as a whole looks at St. Louis as a greater market for them. But all three of those cities, it'll be a shame because, there's a deep history in Oakland, obviously. There's a deep history in San Diego. And there's a deep history in St. Louis dating back to the Cardinals before the Rams. So Somebody's going to lose that. You see it all the time. When these cities lose teams, the first thing they do is try to woo one back.
Hey, John, I want to get your thoughts on I see that the Steelers are interested in hosting the Super Bowl in 2023. We know how much bringing a Super Bowl to your city means, but do you think Pittsburgh and other, Northeast cold weather cities are going to be in the mix anymore, or is New York really, if they're going to go somewhere cold, it's going to be the biggest and best city? I don't want to say the best city, but I guess it is. All right, I know the audience a little bit out here, but is New York the only Northeast outdoor place, or are other people eventually going to start getting in the mix?
Well, remember, Minneapolis got the Super Bowl, so it's going back to Minneapolis, and that's the coldest place.
That's indoors, though, right? That's indoors.
Yeah, that's indoors, but it's a matter of obviously, the logistics, the travel, and all that kind of thing. Now, I lived in Minneapolis for 10 years, so if you are able to get downtown, they have a skyway system where you basically don't have to step outside if you don't want to. But that has given everyone hope, the fact that the NFL, pretty much said if you build it, we will come as far as the Super Bowl goes. If you build a first-class facility, that'll put a northern city into the Super Bowl mix. And that has kind of piqued the interest. One of the main reasons the Eagles have done the upgrades to Lincoln Financial Field is with an eye on hosting the Super Bowl down the line. I don't know if they're going to look, as beautiful as Heinz Stadium is in Pittsburgh, as the Link is here in Philadelphia. I'm not sure, that the NFL would consider stadiums like that. It's going to have to be brand new. It's going to have to be top flight in every single aspect. If you go online and see some of the amenities of that new Minneapolis stadium, even though those stadiums, Heinz and the Link are relatively new, they pale in comparison. So it's given them hope, but I don't think it's likely. I think you're right about New York because of the city, because of the obviously being what New York is. They'll always be in the conversation. But I don't think you're going to see northern Super Bowls as a common occurrence. I think it's going to be a rare thing, maybe once a decade or something like that.
He's John McMullen, the NFL editor, sportsnetwork.com. A little NFL news and notes as we are about 4 weeks away from NFL training camps opening, and, of course, the Eagles August 2nd, which will be in about 1 month from this week. And, of course, John will be all over the Birds and the NFL when the NFL season gets here. John, always a pleasure, pal.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike.